and be a source of funds for us. So you can see, you know, we started out in year one with about 24 walks, but I think that what we've been seeing since year one is that we were filling a need. I mean, our goal that first year, we weren't sure if it was going to work at all, was to have 10 walks, and we were kind of exceeding our own goals even at that point, going from 24 back in 2004 and up to this last year we had 330 for our last fiscal year, which our walks primarily take place between the weekend after Labor Day going until mid-November. So we have about 330 events taking place in that time period. And looking ahead to this fall, we've already got 346 on the books. Our goal is to have 350, and it looks like we may surpass that.
That is fabulous. I did want to mention one thing too. If you have questions as we go through here, we'd like to take questions throughout the webinar that we can address at the moment that we're talking about your item of inquiry.
And I think another thing that might be helpful in mentioning is just kind of giving everyone a sense of what our structure is like here also. I mean, we are a national organization with 75 chapters across the country, and our chapters are all volunteer-based, so we don't have any affiliates. They're all part of our central national organization. So in addition to our chapters, we do have field staff, so we have about 30 staff across the country that work directly with our chapters to help advise them and guide them with their budgets, with their chapter business plans, and with their fundraising to help kind of coach them to success. So most of this work is done by volunteers. And then this just kind of gives you an overview of what our participants have looked like since the beginning. I mean, we started out again back in 2004 with about 4,000 people walking, and we had about 168,000 last year, and we're hoping to hit 200,000 this year. So, and that's just all across the U.S. And this is a chart of our revenue growth. So as you could see, last year, our fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30th. So our fall walks fall into the next year's fiscal year. So you can see we had a really big increase last year, like we said, about 35%. And that little green line at the beginning is showing you what we're trending this year. So we're off to a really strong start. We were just chatting at the beginning of this call about how I'm still really nervous about this. I mean, right now we're at about 30% ahead of where we were at this time last year, but I find that more terrifying than anything else. It's a lot of pressure to keep up. So right now we're just kind of focused on keeping the momentum going and doing what we can to make sure that everyone out across the country, all of our chapter volunteers and our staff feel really supported and have the resources that they need to keep this trend going and ensure that our walks are successful.
And Nicole, we have a question. What percentage of your total income is raised through walks of your total
organizations?
Yeah.
Overall, so we have, this is focusing just on our community walks. Our Out of the Darkness walks, we have a series of 3. So our community walks, which we're focusing on today, and then we have campus walks, which take place in the spring, and they're very similar. They're just kind of geared towards young adults. And then we have 2 national events. There are our overnight walks. And between all of the Out of the Darkness walks, they account for about 75% of our organization's revenue.
Interesting. It's, I know that there are a few people on the call that their organizational revenue includes very little peer-to-peer income right now, so it's interesting how very different your balance is from that. All right. And this is your income growth specifically.
All right. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And then all the slides that you just saw are compiled here, and you can see them in a little bit different way, but definitely significant growth each year and looking great this year. So here's a snapshot. Nicole, if you walk us through this.
Yeah, so this is pretty self-explanatory, but I like numbers and looking at a lot of data. So we have a couple of staff meetings. We do 2 a year where we bring all of our staff together, and one with all of our chapter leaders as well. So we had a meeting back in January where I pulled together some of our numbers just so we could see where exactly this money was coming from. I don't think it's any surprise that 75% of our donations are coming from teams. We know, I think, across the industry that teams tend to raise more. And then this, that kind of indented bullet point there where it has the average per team overall, is if you look at the total dollars raised by all of our teams, but if we pull out the teams who aren't fundraising and just look at teams that are fundraising, then that average goes up a little bit. And then a team fundraiser is going to raise a little bit more too versus someone who's not associated with a team. So an individual on a team is going to raise, in our organization last year we saw about $206 on average versus an individual fundraiser that's raising about $131 on average. Our sponsor revenue is very small, as you can see, so that's an area of opportunity for us. And our total number of actual contributions last year was close to 215,000, with the average donation amount being almost $58. And again, no surprise, but 72% of our funds are coming in online and 28% offline. So offline would be anything, you know, that's mailed to our office prior to an event, or matching gifts, or any revenue that's turned in at the event, because we do collect donations the day of as well.
Excellent. Nicole, we have a question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know off the top of your head your retention rate of walkers?
Oh, not so much with the community walks. Unfortunately, that's something that we do want to dig a little bit deeper into. And I think that's kind of the direction we want to go moving forward. When we look at one of our bigger events, like our overnight walk, which is more of an endurance style event, you know, it's an annual event. It's a 16 to 18 mile walk, and there's a fundraising requirement for that event. There we tend to see, you know, our alumni walkers, as we call them, tend to be our strongest group. And I want to say that we get about 40% of our walkers there are alumni, and they're also our top fundraisers, which again is not so surprising.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to move into a little different area now. One of the things that many industry experts have figured out is that purely focusing on your event, improving the brand, and, you know, putting in 3 dunking booths instead of 1, that sort of thing, it does not actually impact fundraising very much. And we've seen a lot of examples of organizations spending a lot of money, and probably more important, energy on doing those things and producing no significant results. So what does really work, and what Nicole will talk about, I think, is activating volunteers. How do you actually activate them to register and then activate them to fundraise? So one of the things that we know is that people are only motivated to an action in one of 2 ways. They're either motivated intrinsically, meaning I do what I do because of who I see myself as. I'm a good person, so I'll help this other person up the rocks in spite of the fact that she will not give me an iPad when she gets on top. The iPad to the right represents extrinsic motivation, meaning I do what I do because of the thing I want, or the service I want, or the experience I want. I am a consumer. And when you look at events and the way that we communicate with our participants, you pick a path every time, hopefully. And you pick it clearly so that we don't muddy the communications. When you take someone down an intrinsically motivated path, it implies a certain event structure, a way to communicate with them, the kinds of offers you make to them are impacted. And if you take them down an extrinsically motivated path, it's completely different. Extrinsic motivation would be a retail experience. And often in nonprofit, we drift into that in spite of the fact that we can't afford it, number one, because ultimately it is compensation, and it causes our fundraisers to behave in odd ways. So we're going to talk about that and how that manifests a little bit more. Another thing about human beings that's important to know is that, contrary to popular wisdom, we can't educate people enough to get them to change their behavior. Could happen in a few instances, but by and large, human beings change their belief because they watch their body engaged in a behavior. I use myself as an example. I was raised Southern Baptist, or victim of Southern Baptist, whatever how you want to look at it, and my parents drug me to church 3 times a week, no matter what. And you know, I'd rather be riding my pony was my feeling my entire childhood through my 18th birthday. But because they did that, and because I saw my body engaged in those actions, you know, what did I become? But a middle-aged woman in the pew, because I absorbed that belief. My mind hastened to catch up with my body. It had to come up with a narrative that made that make sense. And if I had not been able to do that, I would have experienced what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, meaning my body's doing something that my mind doesn't agree with, and that makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uneasy. That's the underlying basis for the human bias for consistency, meaning if our bodies have done something, our minds are going to reinforce that something to our intellect in a way that will continue that behavior. So we, as human beings, have a bias for consistency in behavior. We use this example to illustrate that because it's a really great one. This is the Ice Bucket Challenge, and all of the millions of people who did the Ice Bucket Challenge did so because they had an intimate knowledge of Lou Gehrig's disease. Okay, they didn't. None of them knew, almost. Most of them didn't know what ALS stood for, and they certainly didn't know what Lou Gehrig's disease was or that it could kill you. But what they did know is this. This is fun. It's exciting. I get to do it with my friends. I get to gracefully show off in the name of doing good in the community, and that's what inspired their behavior. So just like me being drugged to church by my parents, these people were drugged to this behavior by the fun and excitement, but their minds, just like my mind, had to come up with a reason that made sense. And so if that's all true, what would be the reason that made sense to these guys? If that were true, then the Ice Bucket Challenge subsequent to that was the majority of their walk activity. And in their walks, subsequent to the Ice Bucket Challenge, they increased by 37% in revenue and 48% in participation with no investment in walk beyond what was already planned. So these people, as a community, as an organism, if you look at all those millions of people as one organism, were experiencing unease if they didn't continue through with this thing that they had been quite overt about. They had shown everybody, I am attached to ALS, I support ALS, and I'm willing to do this shocking thing on video and ask you to do it too. So it's hard to come back from that and then say, oh, I didn't really mean, I was kidding, you know. So that's the mechanism that we're working with. So those biases that we just talked about, along with a recognition of where people's minds are, lets you impact them. So look at your community in a big way, assuming every single person out there falls into one of these buckets. There are people out there who are not committed to you and won't act on your behalf because they're simply unaware. They're unaware of diabetes, or they're unaware of suicide risk, or they're unaware of hunger. They just don't know it's there. Not a lot of people in those buckets for most of our organizations. The next bucket are people who are not committed, but they are aware. And this is a huge bucket. This is a bucket of people that is most people, actually. And that bucket of people are, you know, they're fully sensitized that, as an example, suicide is a terrible thing and I want to prevent it. But I don't see myself as someone who prevents it through any action on my part. The next bucket is low commitment. Those are people who, through some sort of pressure, have become aligned with you. These are people who've been coerced into being a team member by a family member or a boss. These are people who've been coerced to donate. So that represents our big opportunity there. These are the people that we have to figure out how to use their human biases and transfer them into the high commitment bucket, which is often populated by people who've gone through a traumatic experience. You know, they've lost a loved one, they've had cancer, they've been homeless. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to get people into this high commitment bucket. So back to what Nicole is doing. What are the ways that you can build the internal label that help people transition through that continuum to become highly aligned with you, highly committed with you? I hate slides with lots of bullets, but here it is. Pre-event communications and offers is the way that you touch and move people. The event structure itself and the fundraising model. Avoiding extrinsic demotivators, and we'll talk a little bit about those. Recognition done in messaging, done on site, and done with recognition devices. On-site alignment activities, which, Nicole, I think you guys knocked out of the park, and then focus on volunteer leadership beyond fundraising. So, Nicole, I would ask that you talk to us a little bit about this campaign. This is a team captain campaign, and it is designed to get people, team captains, in early by May 31st for a walk that is much later. Can you talk a little bit about how this has impacted your organization?
Yeah, well, we started this program last year, and we can't help but think that it contributed to our growth just by getting everyone, both on our own staff as well as our participants, focused on the walks early. I mean, we know we start our season in January is when we start posting walks for the fall, and we know at that point in time nobody's really thinking ahead to the fall and about registering for an event or fundraising or any of that. So we launched a program that usually starts around March or April that's encouraging people. It's two-pronged. One is just getting people to register. We're encouraging them to sign up, and then we're encouraging them to start fundraising early, because signing up is usually the easy part, and it's easy to just forget about it until you start receiving communications again a little bit closer to the fall. So this allows us to open the invitation and also give them incentive to start having the conversations earlier and start fundraising earlier on. So this program, there's two parts. One is also focusing on the individual fundraiser who's not a part of a team, but the one that, again, knowing how well team fundraising performs, is targeting team captains and getting them to register and fundraise, and that if we offer a gift. If they hit a certain goal as an individual, then they get a gift. But also if their team reaches a certain goal, the team captain gets an additional gift. And as you can see, it's a branded item, so nothing like an iPad or anything. But again, just to kind of get them going. And you'll see that line, I'm actually glad it's in here, that we have at the bottom of the email. We've kind of shifted our messaging a little bit this year, and we're really focused on the fact that fundraising is not just about the money that's coming in for the participant. It's fundraising. In order to fundraise, you have to tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it and talking about the cause. So in our case, we're telling people that this is an opportunity to talk about why our work is important to them, why they're doing this event, and by doing so, they're creating a culture that's smart about mental health. Our cause has typically had a lot of shame or misunderstanding associated with it, and the only way that we can change that is by getting people to have conversations and realizing that it's okay to talk about your mental health. So that's a big part of our campaign.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to translate this into the psychological speak for a moment. So what Nicole is doing is effectively getting people who are somewhat inclined to register anyway. What she's doing is getting them to register early. And just like dumping that ice bucket of water over your head because it's fun, the people who have a little inclination to register, we've asked them simply to do it earlier, which is great. We're going to get that behavior established earlier, and then we're going to reward them with something that is going to go on their body, which is going to be, or the blanket for use. It's going to be an overt signal to their peer groups with whom they interface that they are attached to AFSP and Out of the Darkness walk. So by doing that, we're helping them reinforce their own internal label. The other thing that I'll point out is we're giving them a hat for raising $1,000. And that's really important. The gifts that we use, we have to make sure that they are of insignificant justification for the behavior that we're asking for. And that's another way to say we have to make sure that they don't mistake this as pay. If I gave them an iPad for raising $1,000, then many people would have this internal conversation. That's a pretty sweet deal. I could spend 4 hours fundraising and get an iPad. That's exactly the conversation we don't want them having with themselves. What we do want them having is a conversation that is about their internal label. Wow, I was able to raise $1,000 and this hat is symbolic of it. That's how they feel. And then they walk into their corner grocery store and someone asks them about their hat. And then we get to reinforce that internal label that they've already have on themselves, and it gets stronger. So that's the dynamic that we're trying to create. To go over some of the statistics behind it, all the psychology ultimately is meaningless unless we can show you the numbers. So, and as Nicole mentioned, the recognition opportunities that we put forth to participants and team captains, it's the same philosophy, different groups. This particular slide is about individual participants, and what I'm showing you are among the people who earned a recognition device, a gift, who redeemed and who didn't, and what was their relative income. So, or I'm sorry, this is the relative numbers of them. I apologize. So many more people in Nicole's peer-to-peer channel want the gift than don't. Actually, your numbers, Nicole, are a little bit higher than some of the clients that we see, and I think that does have something to do with your audience and how they got into that highly aligned bucket, which was typically a really traumatic event. Among that same group of people who earned a recognition gift, what we're showing you here is a comparison, an average fundraising for each of those people who earned and redeemed a gift at $911, or compared to the person who earned but did not redeem a gift at $700. That delta really reflects the difference in their internal alignment. You know, the people who didn't redeem, it's nice that they didn't because they mark themselves as some people that we need to work on harder. And the people who did redeem, that's great for us too, they mark themselves as people that we can really help move to even higher levels of not just fundraising, but volunteer leadership, which is an important part of this conversation. And then to make sure that we're looking at the numbers correctly, we also look at the median. So the people who redeem a gift are at a median of $590 of income, fundraising income, versus the people who earned but did not redeem a gift are at $485. So significant differences between those groups in both income and behavior. I wanted to also, we showed you an email with an early offer for the team captain, but we do the same thing for the registrants. And I think you mentioned that in your discourse on the other slide, Nicole. Did you want to add anything on this one?
I think the only thing I would add is I think our tactic here in terms of the individual registrants, you'll see this number of 150. It may be worth noting, maybe not, but we don't give out free T-shirts at our walks per se. I mean, we do it as almost an incentive in itself. So our kind of first level of an incentive is $150, and at that point you'd get a free T-shirt at the walk. So we were kind of building upon that and saying, you know, this is your only opportunity to get 2 gifts at the $150 level. And we also tried something new this year where the gift that we picked, so while the team captain cap was an exclusive and the only way you could get that gift is if you're a team captain and your team raised that $1,000 by May 31st, and that gift is not offered at any other point during the year. But this blanket is actually the same gift we chose at the $500 level. So not only are you're ensuring that you're going to get your shirt, which is another branded item, and a lot of people really like getting that, as I'm sure all of you know, but you also have the opportunity to get a gift that once the fall comes around, or once you pass May 31st, you'd have to raise $500 to get this gift. So, and you know, we know also that once we get the momentum going, if somebody raises $150, especially by May 31st, chances are they're not going to stop there. We can work with them and get them to continue going. So
excellent. Hang on, we've got a question right here. The first question that we got was, are gifts sent prior to the event? And I'll handle that one if that's all right. We have 2 ways to recognize people. One is for early behavior, and in those cases we do send the gifts before the event because we want it on their bodies, in their hands, in their eyeballs before the event, because we're trying to establish and reinforce the behavior. For the participant recognition program where they redeem gifts, which is based on their total fundraising, we actually do that post-event and on redemption, because we know that we're going to get some markers for behavior if we do it by redemption. And, you know, quite frankly, I fully believe that there are some people who simply are not impacted by this sort of offer, and for those people, we don't want to spend a bunch of money. And then the next question was, how far in advance of the event was the May 31st date? And Nicole, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, this is for our fall event. So we do have a couple of, we call them rogue walks that take place in August, but there are maybe only 6 or 7 of those. So this is really targeting people who are doing a walk that's taking place. Our season starts the weekend after Labor Day, so we're looking at, you know, mid-September. So this May 31st date is a good, you know, nearly, what is that, about 3 to 4 months out, depending on when someone's walk is, because again, they go through mid-November.
Yep. And I'm going to go back to your comment just now, but Kelly asked a question about, do you advertise the price of the blanket before it's available for sale? Or that might have been someone else. But that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. We never advertise the price of any of the materials. Keep in mind that we're trying to, oh, hi, Kelly, thank you. we're trying to make sure that people don't equate the gifts with money. And we avoid that in every way that we can. We keep the gifts low value enough that they never are tempted to go Google it, and even if they did, they wouldn't find it. We make sure that we never offer it for sale in any way. And we also make sure we don't give it away for free, because free is a price. So if we have 15 of these left over, we would never give it to the parking lot attendants, for example, because it is an item of honor. So the, okay, you're welcome. All right, I want to go to the early offers. You know, when you think about the method that we're talking about creating a behavior using a human bias for something. You know, the Ice Bucket Challenge, what they wanted was to have fun, and we knew we could get them to exhibit a behavior, and then we knew that their human biases of consistency, the bias for consistency, would help them continue that behavior. So what Nicole's doing here is getting people to act by May 31st. And I'm showing you some data from another organization because it works on everybody. So the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society we've been working with for going on 6 years, I think. And what we've learned is that the most important metric that we need to push on is the average and median number of days before the event that someone registers. And that's kind of counterintuitive. I mean, aren't we all about the money and the fundraising? And we are. But the fact is, if we can establish a behavior early, then we have two things. We've got the behavior established. We know how to move them along. And number two, we are able to talk to them for longer. I mean, just the simple fact that their inbox is open to us now is very, very meaningful. So spending money and energy and attention early yields huge returns. You can see with leukemia and lymphoma, people who register 181 days out from the event average $440 in income. Now, this bucket of people is not huge. It gets bigger as you go this way. But our effort every year is to push in this direction all the time. We're pushing upstream so that they can listen to us longer and we have more ability to impact them, not just so that we can raise more money, but most important, so we can increase their internal alignment with us. Here's another representation of the same sort of thing, and that is that the closer you get to the event, the more likely you are to raise nothing, because I don't get to talk to you for very long, I don't get to establish a behavior, and I don't get to push on a behavior. There's this weird bump here that I see reflected in a bunch of organizations, which one day I will figure out, but frankly I don't know why it's there. And that bump is a lot of people who register between 91 and 120 days out from an event raise no money. It's a weird bump. We'll figure it out one day, but I haven't yet. Here's the one we do get. This is for leukemia and lymphoma. 40% of the people who show up on event day or register afterward, meaning probably a staff person registered them because they were at the event, 40% of those people raised their money. That's both devastating and intriguing. Devastating in that we have to accommodate all those people. They're drinking our water. We have to keep them safe. Risk management. We got to put a wristband or something on them. They cost us money. But the other side of it is that potentially that could be an acquisition event for next year if we are careful to put their bodies in an experience that helps them align with us. So it's a different way to think about those zeros. And I think Nicole does that well. So I want to hit very briefly, what is an extrinsic demotivator and how might it manifest in your world? One of the things that people love to do for us in nonprofit is give us stuff to raffle and give away. They'll give us gift cards. They'll give us tickets to the theater. They'll give us airplane tickets. And unfortunately, all those things, as well-intentioned as they are, start fundraisers and volunteers down a path of being extrinsically motivated, meaning I evaluate my effort now with a dollar figure in the equation, as opposed to I do it because of who I am. Now you've handed me an airline ticket that's worth $700, and I'm subconsciously I start doing math, and that's always bad for nonprofits. The other thing is a registration fee. When we charge a registration fee, we literally put a price tag on access to our event, to our activity. And that does a couple of things. You know, people like it because it makes you feel like you've covered your cost. But statistically, and I think the Blackbaud benchmark study bears this out beautifully, a registration fee is linked to lower income. And in fact, Nicole, your registration fee?
Is 0. We do not have one.
Yeah.
You know, I think, and particularly when we started out with these walks, we wanted to create as few barriers to entry as possible. You know, we didn't even know if these would succeed, and so I think having this $0 registration fee, I mean, our goal at that time is we needed people coming out and kind of forming a legion of supporters, if you will, to champion our cause. And so part of it may have been out of necessity. I mean, I wasn't here back in 2004, but I'm sure that was part of it. But then, you know, we did interview a lot of other organizations when we were launching these, and it is kind of in line with what Katrina was saying, that, you know, we didn't want to create the sense that you pay your fee and that's it, you're done. You know, we wanted to have voluntary buy-in and get people there and then encourage them to do even more. You know, it seems like if we had a fee, most people kind of just stop there and feel like they've given what they needed to do and don't continue to fundraise. So we've gone with the $0 fee, and the only case we do have a registration fee is with our overnight walk, because there is a fundraising commitment that goes along with that as well. So in that case, the fee we found actually works because versus having a $0 registration fee, because once you've put your money on something, you're more invested and you're committed, so the people that pay the registration fee are more likely to actually follow through and participate in the event, versus in the past we've experimented with allowing free registration as a promotion on an event or something like that, and oftentimes we've found that those people would drop out prior to the walk and not continue through and do their fundraising. So that's the only case where we have it. But for all of our community and campus walks, we don't have a registration fee.
Well done. You just read one of the questions that you couldn't even see. I did ask the question about, can you talk about why challenge events do have reg fees and walks? And I think that was a wonderful explanation. I do think that one of the things that challenge events have to be wary of is talking too much about the registration fee instead of taking it as a matter of course. Well, of course you're paying the reg fee and then we won't talk about it again, because sometimes that can turn into a purchasing experience, not so much on the reg fee but on the minimum fundraising, and not so much with events like Nicole's, which she owns her event. But if Nicole was putting bibs on people for Boston Marathon, then it could become very transactional. So that's probably a whole day's conversation right there, and a very interesting one. Another question from Adi: do you consider registration fee the same as minimum fundraising? And Nicole, do you want to address that?
Yeah, we don't. So I think particularly again with our overnight walk, that registration fee is kind of that psychological buy-in as well. You know, you paid for something, so obviously it must be important enough for you to put up that upfront cost to do the fundraising on top of it. And for us, you know, from a logistics standpoint, I suppose those fees kind of cover to some of the bare minimum of costs of putting on an event like that. I mean, as we all know, some of those challenge events are really expensive to put on. So the fundraising minimum kind of helps us to not just cover the cost, but also meet our budget goals. So I think for us, those are two completely separate things. And the same with, I know that our organization outside of the walks, you know, we do have some spots in endurance events like the Disney Marathons or Boston Marathon, in which case, you know, a lot of times the registration fee may cover the cost of the slot, and then the fundraising minimum is just completely separate again.
Very good. Nicole, do you have any commentary question for me about the relative expense to income ratios of walks versus challenge events?
Do I have any questions?
No, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so walks, and part of the reason why we went with walks, you know, we get asked all the time, can we, you know, from people, because again, our events are volunteer driven, so people that are wanting to start them want to do a walk run or something like that. But, you know, walks are really easy to do, they're accessible, and they're affordable. I mean, there are really few expenses that go along with doing it. I mean, I think that for our walk program, it's very easy for us to keep our overall expenses to less than 10% of the cost of hosting these versus something like a challenge event where we have, you know, there's increased permitting, there's increased security, there's food, there's, you know, we have stops along the way. So something like our overnight walk could cost us $1 million just to put on between advertising and logistics expenses, you know, and hoping to get something like a 50 or 60% return on those types of events might be seen as successful versus something like a small community walk.
Okay. So, and I know you don't have specifics on retention rates, but would you dare a guess at the relative retention differences between those two types of events?
You know, I guess for us it's really it's hard to say because depending on where people are coming from. So 78% of our participants have been personally affected by the cause. So for a lot of them, it really depends on what they're looking to get out of the experience. You know, we've noticed, particularly with our challenge event, that many people do just come to it as a one-time thing because it's part of their healing journey, and they do it, and it's kind of cathartic, and then they're ready to move on. And then one thing that we're interested in looking at, though, is the continuum. So what we're trying to look at a lot more and focus on is the people who go from doing our challenge event to then going and getting involved in their local community where the commitment is much lower, and then also looking at it the other way around. So I think people that are doing the community walks are probably much more likely to do the walk year after year. So I'd imagine that the retention rate is higher there overall just because of the commitment level than it is for something like the overnight. But I think that the people that are alumni walkers, as we call them, for something like our overnight event are going to be kind of our much more dedicated, loyal year-over-year participants because they are willing to take up the commitment of not only raising at least $1,000, which is our fundraising minimum for that event, but also staying up all night. I mean, that event is literally an overnight event from sunset to sunrise, and then also walking somewhere between 16 and 18 miles, depending on our route for that year. So so I guess I just, you know, overall, if we're just looking at return participation, my guess would be that it's probably a little bit higher for our community walks, but
Okay.
The level of engagement is probably a little bit higher for our overnight walk.
Okay, very good. All right, moving on. One of the things that you talked about was the T-shirt and your handling of it, which I thought was quite interesting. In the old days, often you would pay a reg fee and you got your T-shirt, and you guys went away from that decision. Do you want to talk about why?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, it simply comes down to expenses. I mean, ultimately, the goal of these walks is to raise money, and if we were providing shirts to all of our participants, then I think that our returns would be much, much lower. And you know, we didn't want people coming out simply for, you know, getting a free T-shirt. So I think by choosing making this kind of part of the incentive program, it gives people a reason to get there and to really, again, align themselves with our brand. And we try to focus on the activities that are at the event that don't cost money, to give people a chance to take part in a day of, I think we even have on our website, you know, you're welcome to come and take part of our activities and snacks and camaraderie and everything else that comes along with doing a walk, but you'll only get a shirt if you're actually fundraising. So
yeah, and that falls in line with a lot of the things that we know. You know, if you pay for your activity and you get a shirt, you just bought your shirt and your experience. There's another impact, psychological impact at work in the way that you're positioning this offer. We know that psychologically, if I ask someone to do something and I tell them what I want them to do, we call that an engagement ask. Please go register, you registered, you got your shirt. But if I change that offer to raise $150 and get a shirt, that's called a performance ask. And we know that statistically people perform better with performance asks than engagement asks. So you did it right like 4 different ways. So God bless you. Wonderful. So pardon me. One of the things we want to talk about are other alignment activities that can happen, you know, outside the context of a recognition program. and even beyond messaging, but what's happening on site that helps your people align with your organization because they are being overt in their attachment to you. So if you could talk about that a little bit for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we have, again, because all of our walks are locally organized, everyone has a little bit of their own flavor. So we do have some best practices and standards and brand guidelines, but we do allow people flexibility in designing their program and what sorts of offerings they're giving. And some of the most popular ones have to do with recognition in a way that, for example, you know, if the top fundraising team by a certain date carries the banner and leads the walkout, and you know, we find a lot of people are really excited about that. Same with the top team tent. You know, I know one of our walks does a breakfast every year, a catered breakfast for the top team, and they get a tent, and they've actually had, you know, they get a lot of competition for that, and the same team year over year is always trying to outdo the closest competition because that's really important to them. They want that tent. Also, each site has sponsors, and you know, they get logos put on the back of the shirt. But in addition to being a business sponsor, some of our sites will say if you raise $1,000 or whatever that level might be by a certain date, we're going to add your team's name to the back of the shirt, and everyone who's receiving a t-shirt, they're going to be walking around with your team's name on the back of it. We also try to look at some of our top teams and top fundraisers to be part of our opening program. So they might come up on stage and either share their story, or they might be the one to hand out an award or to lead off the walk. We have honor beads on here. So basically this is something that is, I think, a little unique for us. It started with our overnight, but we use beads similar to like the Mardi Gras beads, but each color symbolizes a connection to the cause. And so based on the overnight, where we actually do a bead ceremony where we have a person or a couple of people each representing the different color based on their experience, you know, we'll kind of look at different people to come up on stage and represent the beads and kind of make them feel a part of it in that way. And that also goes into the non-fundraiser activities that are mentioned on here. I mean, so some of those things, we're looking at our fundraisers, but we do want to give everyone a part in our community at the event. So everyone can pick up beads, even if you're not part of the ceremony. You know, you can wear beads, or there might be a different activity that's related to these colors that's symbolizing your connection to the cause, that's allowing you to look around and see that you're not alone, that other people have had similar experiences. You know, one big thing about our walk is creating a safe place where everyone's understood. So if this is your first time getting involved, you can come out here and feel really supported and feel part of a community that's really trying to do something positive and you know, create hope and have a place for healing. We do other activities. You know, some sites do a memory wall where they can write messages about loved ones lost or have photos, and then much more, we're starting to see a shift where we're having people that we've been calling people with lived experience, so people that have personally suffered from depression or another mental illness or have personally attempted suicide, coming out and sharing their own stories without fear of being judged or shamed. So we're starting to incorporate a lot more activities for that too, to have people in the same way that we might see with, say, for example, a breast cancer walk, where they're wearing something that's saying, I beat breast cancer. You know, we're trying to do the same with people with depression and say, you know, this is the person sitting next to you at work every day could be suffering and you don't know, and they're living with an illness, same way somebody with diabetes, you know, has to take insulin every day. It's a manageable illness. And so we're giving people, the goal is to give opportunities for our participants to come out and identify themselves and find connections with others in a safe environment, and then kind of take that and be a champion. And the hope is that even if they're not fundraising this year, that based on that experience, and maybe next year they'll come back and take it to the next level.
And I think too that what you've done, Nicole, you know, sometimes I feel like it's my job to take that beautiful story you just told and break it down to some cold, hard psychological stuff that's not nearly as much fun. There's nothing warm and fuzzy about it. But I think what you've done is two things with what's on screen now. You have all the top teams that you recognize on site in the way that you do. It's really hard for them to back up next year. It's really hard for them to say, oh, yeah, well, this year I don't care. Even though I was on stage last year and there was deeply meaningful, this year I don't care. Not going to happen. They're going to come back. The non-fundraiser activities are a great acquisition technique for you to get people aligned with you to the point that they'll become participants next year. So well done. We want to take a little bit of an aside about teams right now. And I have one question that I'm going to answer at the end of the presentation. So don't want you to think I didn't see you. So I want to take an aside about teams because teams are indeed magic. These are the stats that we saw at the beginning, and I wanted to focus on those a little bit because they're, why are teams magic? That's a question we rarely answer or ask, and the answer is because, again, back to a psychological principle, there's social norm pressure. They have been overt to their team members. There's a reciprocity bias in their relationship, meaning, you're doing this for me, I'll do something for you later. That's all part of team membership, and it's brilliantly successful. Again, I'll go to an outside organization to show you that it works the same way across the board. For leukemia and lymphoma, the people who are team captains raise 547% more than people who are not on teams. And the team members raise 21% more than people who are not on teams. So those are huge numbers and something that we really pay attention to. And we know that we can really lean on our team captains both to exert social pressure and to also acquire new participants for us. If I reward a team captain for building out a team, that's as good as running, a shotgun campaign to the general public, or probably better, because that team captain knows who's friendly to us, and that's who they're going to. So this is one of the things that was part of our large bulleted list of ways that you can increase your intrinsic tie to an organization, and that's volunteer leadership. And this is an area of huge interest for me. I was sort of born and raised in the Relay for Life world, where volunteer leadership is paramount and is the secret sauce to their growth. And I think, Nicole, your organization, I was at your staff conference a year ago, and when I looked around the room and realized that every person there was carrying between 5 and 7 events, I realized you didn't articulate it to me as such, but you were in a heavily volunteer-driven model, and you were doing it really well. So the heart of it is the woman here. Another client of ours, the Alzheimer's Association, also does this brilliantly. We put her in a shirt. We put her in the community. So can you talk to us a little bit about your volunteer leadership and, their relationship with staff, pardon, and what kind of ratios you enjoy?
Yeah, so we have been pretty grassroots from day one, and as I mentioned, we're volunteer-driven. All of our chapters, our chapter boards are all volunteers. So our goal is really about empowering people and giving them a sense of ownership. So as Katrina mentioned, we have about 30 field staff that are overseeing these 75 chapters, and we don't have chapter coverage for all of our walks. So about 86% of our walks are affiliated with a chapter, but we do still have some gaps. So overall, our staff on average are actually overseeing about 11 events, and that does vary based on the size of a market or that sort of thing, and the events clearly vary in size as well. But really, their role is to kind of be a mentor or serve as guidance and kind of help them navigate, what they should be doing at certain types of year, helping lead them to a successful walk. So whether that's with budgeting, recruitment, fundraising, it's just really, we're here to serve as a resource and kind of putting the onus on our volunteers to make these events successful. We do encourage, as part of our program, that one of the first steps that somebody has to take when they want to host an event is not just come on their own, but they need to form a committee. So we do emphasize that we don't want our folks burning out. We know burnout is a huge issue across nonprofit organizations with volunteers, because especially with our volunteers that are most passionate and most engaged, a lot of them tend to give it their all. So, we're here to just kind of guide them along the way and help them make the best decisions, but really the ownership is on them.
Excellent. And I wanted to point out too, volunteer committees are really important, and Nicole will laugh because I've been chasing her for this data for years. And that is, if you look at the money coming into a volunteer-driven event and you trace it back, you'll find most of it originates from the volunteer committee. So the act of being a volunteer leader actually contributes to your success as a fundraiser, because again, if you are volunteering and then you don't fundraise, you experience some cognitive dissonance because you're not following through. Your body's not following through with what your mind believes, and vice versa. Any thoughts about that, Nicole?
I would just have to agree. I think that most of our volunteers have started out as a fundraiser at some point and kind of worked their way up into a deeper level of involvement. So I think that it's not necessarily surprising that we would see our committee volunteers being some of our higher fundraisers, though we are still trying to work out the data to prove that.
And we are going to help you with that. So one of the things that we also know is that, you know, when we position offers like this to our volunteer constituents, we have to do it really well. You know, whenever we make offers like this, we have to make sure that we deliver on the promise, and that can be really difficult. I think that Nicole and Turnkey and her other partners have built out a pretty rigid system that includes robust project management and also lots of analysis. And Nicole, you mentioned this earlier, but I wanted you to hit upon, and I'd love to know how much time of your day goes to creating and evaluating reports.
I guess a lot, really. I mean, like I said, I'm kind of a data geek, and I like figuring out figuring out what to look at. You know, I mean, I think it's important to know what I'm looking for and then what we're going to do with that information. But a lot of it, particularly as we get closer to our walk season, is about staying ahead of the curve and being proactive. So it's really important for us to be paying close attention to our numbers and looking at our top events and making sure that they're continuing to perform, and if they're not, trying to troubleshoot before it gets too late. So, I mean, we have one report that's kind of a snapshot of our overall performance for the season, that at certain points that's getting refreshed a couple of times a day, but you know, luckily that's just that's something that's built in online. But I actually do a pretty in-depth weekly report that I probably spend an hour or two on, just between pulling the data and organizing it and then actually looking through all of it. So, you know, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time actually getting buried in the data as much as I want to get as much information out of it as possible and then take action from it.
Excellent. All right, so to recap, you know, what we've talked about is we're trying to build an internal label in our fundraisers, an intrinsic label, and the ways that we do that are shown here. I want to, and we've gone through all these things, I want to go to avoiding extrinsic demotivators and answer one of the questions that was asked. Someone asked, do you also provide merchandise for purchase, different products from incentives? And I'll answer that a couple of ways. Number one, if you are going to provide merchandise for purchase, then absolutely it can't be the same thing as your incentives, because then you would have monetized the incentive product. But I'll share my experience of 26 years, which is that I have been part of and been an advocate for in my younger years of putting up online stores so that people could buy merchandise and wear it to show their pride. And what I've learned over time is that all the energy and expense and dead product stuck in warehouses across the country pretty much make that a bad idea. An online store, in my experience, for a nonprofit is best served in distributing materials to volunteer leadership and to staff, materials that are needed to make their lives easier as they execute the event. My experience is that people don't buy a lot of product just because. It happens, but not enough to create a revenue stream and not enough to divert the energy, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy and attention to put up a good online store with a built-out merchandise selection. I think that, personally, again, based on experience, the place for logo imprinted products is in recognition, as opposed to trying to create a retail environment to make money. There are many Amazons of the world who will do that better than us all day long. So that's my thought. Nicole, do you have a thought on that question? And I'll reiterate it since I talked for a few.
I would just say that I agree. I mean, I think we've just experienced the same thing. We do have some items, and again, it is always different from what we're offering as incentives, and usually they're more kind of smaller trinket type things that like a magnet or a bracelet or something like that. But I think just from personal experience, I've seen the same.
Yeah, and most often what I find is that question comes up when someone's CEO wants a glamour shot store. You know, let me show you our online store, and then I get trotted out to tell the CEO why that's a bad idea. which I'm happy to do.
Well, and something that we've experienced with our own staff too is because we do get a few people that get caught up in that idea that having a store, being able to sell merchandise is going to be this huge revenue stream, and it winds up taking up valuable time that could have been better spent focusing on, reaching out to people, encouraging them to fundraise, because that's going to be much more fruitful than the amount of time that it would take to set up a store, whether it's online or at the event.
Yes, agreed. So Nicole, this is our last slide, so if anyone has questions, now's the time. What's next for you guys? I know when I asked you that question, preparing for this webinar, that the first thing out of your mouth was that 63% of registrants who don't fundraise. Tell me about that and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I know that, based on some of the conversations that we've had and what you said at our meeting back in January when you joined our staff, or when we were at the peer-to-peer conference in February, is not giving up on the zero balance people, but kind of getting them to take some of these baby steps so that it would kind of create that that connection to us, so that, they're feeling more bought in and then fundraise. So for us, we've revamped our messaging. We have shorter, more targeted emails that are kind of bringing people into the fold. Getting them one of our templates that we're using now is 5 things you could do for suicide prevention in 5 minutes, and they're basically all having to deal with sharing on social media and that sort of thing. And just again, kind of getting them to take these baby steps to work their way into our fold, because again, we're hoping that eventually they'll return year over year and be bought in, and then they'll also start fundraising. For our event growth, I think that we're going to kind of start seeing that level out a little bit, and just with a focus on strengthening our existing events. But that being said, we are volunteer driven, so if we do have a group of people that come to us and they're, really gung-ho and organized and have a committee, then we'll continue to see some growth there. For our event staff, I think that as we grow as an organization, our strategic plan for the next 5 years is to double our revenue, in 5 years, and we're well on pace to do that. And our investment needs to be in our infrastructure. So I think we're going to see a lot more staff placements in the field, and we want to see every chapter connected to a staff person. Yeah, and so then, in the other, just kind of, I think as I mentioned much earlier, that our areas of opportunity lie in the corporate sponsorship world, and that's probably going to start focusing on just even recruiting corporate teams and getting corporate champions for the cause, and eventually forming bigger partnerships with them. So.
Excellent. One question for you. Can you tell us again how many community walks and campus walks you have? How many of each?
Yeah, so we're close to 350 for this fall so far, so we'll be more or less around there. I'm sure we're going to be adding a few more. We always get some last minute ones that come in. And campus walks last spring, so 2015 we had 115 campus walks, which was up from 85 the year before. So we'll see those continue to go up. I would imagine that we'd have at least 125 next spring, if not more.
Excellent. Very good. Well, we are at 1 hour and 1 minute, so I want to thank everyone. Oh, one more question. Hang on. If possible, what's the overall revenue from the 350 walks?
So last year, our overall revenue was over $12.7 million, which was about a $3 million increase from the year before. This year, our budget goal is about $14 million, but our stretch goal, our internal goal, and the one that I'm pushing is $15 million, because I think that's attainable.
Given your record, I'd say you will nail that. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Nicole, thank you so much. You've been very giving with your time and your expertise, and I love the culture that it's creating among the nonprofits who are trying to do good in the world. So thank you for that. Thank you for everyone for joining us, and I'm sure at some point soon, Ms. Jenny will be sending you another invitation to hear another vibrant speaker like Nicole. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.